All right. Here we go. Or do we? Let me see here. Hold on. Let me refresh the old
You're going.
youtube.com. Yeah, we're rocking, Josh. We
Oh yeah,
good?
yeah, you're good.
All right. We're in business then. Welcome to the deeper dive. Dave Lochran, Adam Shaw. Oh, there we go. Now we're rocking. Okay. Took a second to pop up there. I wanted to get that tweet out. Look, I'm not even going to mention it. Adam, 10 games today. Certainly an interesting slate. I will say this much, though, as we look at this 10-game NBA slate for Wednesday night. For having this many games, I can't say I'm overwhelmed. I can't say that the quality options are overwhelming. Like there's definitely a group of guys that I really like. And then there's a bunch of other players. And I obviously will wait on injuries and such, but it's not like this is a particularly loaded slate despite the amount of games.
Yeah, it's a pretty ugly one. Anyone who saw the strategy show this morning with Josh and myself, it was easily our shortest show together this season with 10 games on the slate just because there's not a ton to talk about. There's a lot of really ugly spots and really not a lot of injury news with Tim Hardaway being ruled in, with Torian Prince playing. There's not a lot going on, and then some, just kind of ugly matchups, whether teams that I would like to play their guys are playing, good defensive teams or slow pace or whatever. Yeah, it's a weird slate for 10 games.
For sure. Welcome to all of our viewers. Thanks for tuning in. Marino for Life says, my second favorite show. Let's get this money. Well, it should be your first. My dude Sam Dizzle right there knows what's up. The next gen dad, McCod. Smash that like button, he says. That's right. Hit us with a like. We love you guys. We also love those thumbs up. They help us out exponentially. Let's jump right into it. We got 10 games to talk about. We got about a little over an hour to get through it. And I think a bunch of these games, though, we will not spend too much time on, but we'll definitely get as much information in as possible on all of the pertinent ones. OKC and Cleveland is certainly pertinent, Adam. No Russell Westbrook, out with what looked to be a pretty ugly ankle injury. When Westbrook doesn't play, when he's out, you know that it's actually relatively serious. This dude's an Iron Man. We know that he plays as often as he possibly can. He's gone seasons without missing a game. He's out today, though. OKC's a 6-point road favorite, 217 total here against the 30th ranked defense in basketball, which is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Dennis Schroeder, Paul George, absolutely love these guys. Both of them, I have no problem playing both in the same lineup either, because who else do they have on this team that is a ball dominant, high shot volume player outside of Schroeder and Paul George?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a really good spot for them. I think they're both good plays on either site. I do think that Paul George is a better play on DraftKings than FanDuel, and I think Schroeder's a better play on FanDuel than DraftKings. That being said, they're both, great plays on both sites. You have Schroeder, obviously in line for more minutes here with Westbrook out, probably will get up to 35, 36 minutes, but a 29% usage rate without Westbrook on the floor this season. His assist percentage should be in the mid to upper 30s. And then Paul George, 33.3% usage rate without Westbrook on the floor this season, basically locked into around 38 minutes a night with or without Westbrook, but that should be more productive minutes now. So, yeah, I mean, a huge, huge chunk of this offense should be coming from these two guys.
That's right. Manningdale City says this is a slate where we can't be iffy. Got to take strong Laffy D stands. Look, we will take stands. There's no doubt. This is certainly Sean V told y'all DeAndre Ayton chalk bust. Were there like didn't DeAndre Jordan and most centers on that slate underwhelm?
Everyone sucked.
Okay, I thought so. I think Dwight Howard had like 27. I think most centers were pretty much dog shit, but I'd have to go back and take a look at that. Outside of CJ McCollum, it was pretty
Yeah.
underwhelming.
I don't know how
But
Nurkic did. I know Jordan, Ayton, and Howard all sucked.
Sean also says Dennis Schroeder, the biggest chalk bust, or the okay, never mind. I thought he said the biggest chalk bust. He said the biggest chalk in history tonight. I mean, he's definitely going to be chalky. There's no question, Adam. Um, I think you also have to factor in though that this is a really bad Cleveland team, but not just that. I look at this entire Oklahoma City roster. And I just want to go over this. You have Raymond Felton, you have Alex Abrines, you have I'm not going to even talk about those guys. You have Jeremy Grant, who is actually playing quite well, but he's still Jeremy Grant. He's not going to create his own plays. He can't create his own plays. You have Terrence Ferguson. You also have Patrick Patterson, Abdel Nader, Steven Adams, good player, but again, not someone that's siphoning usage away. Neither is Nerlens Noel. I mean, if I were to honestly ask you, what player other than Schroeder and Paul George is going to touch the ball more than 25 times tonight, you'd have a tough time giving me an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the answer would probably be like Steven Adams because he gets rebounds. But
that's it.
Talking about the offensive end, there's not really an answer. Like these two guys are just going to dominate so much of the offense.
Yep, no doubt about it. Look at this. Here we go. Chat's getting lit up right now. Let's keep it going. Happy to answer any questions as well. Quincy Collins, is Schroeder a chalk you should fade, though? In cash, absolutely not. Like, there just isn't any reason to fade him in cash. But look, I'm still going to have some Schroeder and George in tournaments too, Adam, just because I have a very difficult time, again, I'll say it again, overlooking the amount of sheer usage they're going to have that can't be siphoned away from anyone else on this basketball team.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then a couple of things to add to that too, just from a slate aspect. One, there's 10 games. So chalk on a 10-game slate naturally is just lower owned than on, a 6-game slate, for example. And then you kind of are going to run into the issue also where at lower stakes, where people just aren't as good, Schroeder's ownership's obviously going to be lower to the point where you don't really want to fade him anyway because it's too low. And then at higher stakes, where it would make more sense from an ownership perspective, the tournaments are just not as big. So you can get away with playing, 60% owned guys. So yeah, it's a spot where if with Schroeder, there are a bunch of guys around him that I think have, similar ceilings. So if you wanted to get away from him, I think it's not that difficult, but I still think he's, one of the best plays. Paul George, it's kind of, I think he's kind of like in a league of his own at 9,100 on DraftKings at least. So I'm not going into the slate looking to fade these guys. With 10 games, I think that there's just going to be other spots where I can be different.
Yeah. Deverick Holmes, do you guys consider 10 to 20 man leagues as cash? No, cash doesn't even, that doesn't even matter. If it's a 20 man league and it's paying out, 50% or 45%, depending on whether it's a double up or a 50-50, then yes, it's cash. If it's a 20 man league, Adam, and it pays out the top player only, then hard to consider that a cash game.
Yeah, just pay attention to what percent of the field cashes. Like if it's like one of the ones I think FanDuel runs with, top 3 get paid out of 20, then you should be playing. You should be taking more risks in your lineups because you need to come in the top, 15% or whatever that is.
I like this question from I'm just going to call him Ever because I think he has brackets in there. Can you fade PG-13 for DeMar DeRozan for a similar price point on FanDuel? Not the same position, but Paul George is 10-2, DeRozan's 9. DraftKings would make more sense, right? Where DeRozan and George both have small forward eligibility and they're $100 different. I'm going to assume he's talking about DraftKings because FanDuel, the pricing and the positions aren't even close.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of guy that you would want to do it with, I think. I have George projected for a lot more than DeMar DeRozan, but DeRozan clearly has the kind of ceiling where he can beat Paul George, any given night. So if you wanted to take that stand, I think DeRozan's the kind of guy you would do it with. It's just not a spot where I'm looking to do that. Like, I don't think that on a slate this big, I'm going to force myself to not play Paul George.
Yeah, I'm with you. Matt Kirby, I think it's a prerequisite to have a barking dog in these videos. All right, but I know. That's my fault. I shut the door. Should be in a pain in the ass. On the other side of this game, unless there's anyone else for OKC, for me, it's just strictly those two guys. Maybe you have someone else you like here?
No, I mean, I think Grant and Adams are fine, but Schroeder and George are the ones that are really, popping off the page for me.
So Sam Decker's out for Cleveland. And obviously, Kevin Love remains sidelined as they continue on with their tank operation. Anything you have interest in here with the Cavs?
Sort of. So George Hill at $4,000 on DraftKings is just mispriced. Obviously coming off of a good game, he's going to be really popular. And this is the kind of spot where I have no issue in tournaments fading George Hill. Yeah, he's too cheap, but chances are he gives you, 25 points and he's a good point per dollar play, but he doesn't put up a raw points total that you have to have. If he does, then you got unlucky. But That's the kind of guy where I would rather differentiate if he's going to get a bunch of ownership coming off of his 44-point night. I still think he's a good cash game play, though. Should get around 30 minutes at $4,000. Jordan Clarkson's the one that I like in tournaments. I think he's going to be the biggest beneficiary of Sam Dekker being out. Even though they play different positions, it makes it easier for them to close with Jordan Clarkson on the floor. So instead of him being stuck at around 22 minutes, I think you get 27 to 28 minutes from Jordan Clarkson. He's obviously a guy that'll go out there and chuck up shots. They probably will need offense to hang in this game with Oklahoma City. So I do like Jordan Clarkson. I think that Chetty's price tag is more than fair at 5,200. Should play around 36 minutes. The issue is just that Chetty's not that great. But yeah, Chetty and Clarkson are the two that I like.
Yeah, I'm not huge on anyone here. I actually do think that George Hill's price on DraftKings is pretty reasonable. If you look at the team since Ty Lue was gone and Larry Drew took over as interim coach, he's clearly trying. He's clearly has no intention, I guess, of getting the young guys in there. Right, Tristan Thompson's exploding, and George Hill. And by the way, really tough spot for Thompson. So not looking to chase points there, but you've seen George Hill play some serious minutes in his last close game. He played 32 minutes. So he's 4K, very, very cheap on DraftKings. I don't think that's a crazy option there. And obviously you have some concern of a blowout. There's a bad Cleveland team, but Oklahoma City's not that good either. So outside of George and Schroeder, they have no offense. And sure, you have a defensive anchor in Adams, and George isn't bad, but that team needs some work. So I think this game could stay relatively close. Anything else, or can we move on to Detroit and Orlando?
We can go to Detroit, Orlando.
All right, that's what we'll do. Orlando is a 3-point dog on the road, 212 total here. A couple of interesting things. I was writing the deep dive today, which you and I switch off days throughout the week. It's on awesemo.com, awesemo.com. If you haven't checked it out yet, highly suggest you do so. You can, try it out for a week and see if you like it. The content on there, though, we've got pretty much everything that you could use, from projections to ownership projections to in-depth articles and more. But when it came to Blake Griffin, I start writing him up. I'm just looking at stuff. I'm like, all right, he's got the 10th highest usage rate in the league, Adam. Pretty sweet, 30.5%. I like that. But he's doing so much more. Like, he leads the Pistons in potential assists. He has 12.8 potential assists per game. Ish Smith and Reggie Jackson, their point guards, have 6.8 and 6.3 respectively, half of what Griffin is averaging per game. He's actually due for positive regression as a facilitator. So let me take it a step further. He has the 12th most potential assists in the entire league, and he's a power forward. He still ranks third in scoring, 28.1 points per game. And even though he plays next to Drummond for most of his minutes, he has the 11th most rebounds in the league. So you have all of that, and then put that on top of the fact that he's averaging 37 minutes per game and leads the entire league in touches. He leads the whole damn league in touches with 95 per game. So yes, Griffin is expensive, but he's 96 on FanDuel. I don't think that's insane, given that you have guys like Kawhi Leonard priced $500 more expensive than him, regardless of whether or not he plays. I'm not saying that Griffin will blow up here. What I'm saying, Adam, is that he is so ridiculously heavily involved in all facets of the game under Dwayne Casey with the Pistons that it's not surprising that Griffin continues to put up these monster games in almost every category.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've talked about it before that I use an expected assist percentage based on potential assists to try and reflect how involved players are as a facilitator without, relying on their guys to actually have made shots in prior games. And you mentioned the potential assist that Blake has. For the season, he has a 28.6% expected assist percentage. His actual assist percentage is about 24.1%. And then if you want to compare him to the point guards, you have Reggie Jackson at 16.7% expected assist percentage, and you have Ish at about 19.6. So Blake is just doing so much, like you said, scoring, passing, rebounding. He's a little bit cheaper on FanDuel than DraftKings, which makes him an even better play there. But I think he's a really good play regardless tonight. I have him projected for about 51.5 DraftKings points.
Yeah, it's really hard not to like him. FanDuel too, 9,600 is pretty cheap, given how much other guys cost. It's just really hard to ignore. Like Griffin isn't a must play now that his price is up here, but you are talking about someone, Adam, that is still below the 10K threshold and is no joke producing basically the same same numbers. Easy for me to say as LeBron James this year, the same as Russell Westbrook. Like basically the same as Anthony Davis. And he's markedly cheaper than all of them. So I don't think we can ignore that. What else do you like in this game? Feel free to start wherever you'd like. If there's anything else in Detroit, let's start there and then shift over to Orlando. But I think Griffin for me is the only guy I really have much love for.
I really like Drummond too. I have him
Yeah.
projected for basically the same amount of points as Griffin, and he's even cheaper on DraftKings at $9,000. So I like both of those guys. That's normally where I start and end with Detroit. If you need a cheap guy, if Glenn Robinson the third starts again, then he's only 3,400. But as far as players that I actually really like, it's Drummond and Griffin.
Talk to me about Orlando here. I know you had some interesting thoughts on the front court this morning.
Yeah, I think that. So we're still waiting on Evan Fournier news, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So if I'm assuming Fournier plays, but obviously keep an eye on that. Um, Aaron Gordon, I think, is really interesting, especially on DraftKings at $7,000. We saw him play about 34 minutes in his last game, but that was on the second half of a back-to-back after he had played, I think it was 42 the night before. Now he has a matchup against this Detroit front court that has Blake Griffin. We know that Gordon has been used, basically throughout his career to defend ball-dominant guys, and it just so happens that this would be the natural guy for him to defend anyway. Griffin's been playing like 38 plus minutes a night. It wouldn't surprise me if we see another 38 to 40-minute game from Aaron Gordon here because he plays big minutes anyway, and then he's going to be used to defend Griffin. So I'm projecting Gordon on the high end of his minutes range, especially, obviously for tournaments, just to try and get as much, of him as I can, or at least project him as highly as I can. The usage hasn't really been as high as we would like this season. He probably sees a bump there if Fournier misses, but I think the minutes should be there. And at $7,000, it makes him a pretty interesting option.
I think so too. What do you expect in minutes today? Because Gordon in competitive games is playing big minutes. Like, okay, games decided by 8 or fewer points this year, 36.2 minutes per game. Like, playing time has not been an issue for Gordon.
Yeah, I have Gordon and Griffin both projected for 38 minutes.
Okay. So let me take a step back. I had to respond to somebody in chat. Manningdale City says, "Can we play Blake and AD?" That's probably going to be tough because I'm looking to get Georgia in too. What do you think AD is even necessary? I know we're jumping around, but I want to ask you that just now while he asked the question.
In my initial crunch on DraftKings, it only gave me like 10%. I haven't projected as the highest scorer on the slate, but I still wasn't getting a ton of them.
All right. We had a couple guys asking when the show started too. If you hit the notification bell, you should get notified like the moment shows start. Because I know sometimes we jump around depending on what how big the slate is. The Fournier news is definitely interesting, though. You touched on that a bit. Jonathan Simmons is Fournier's direct backup. So I think you mentioned the minute projections for Vooch and for Gordon. I put Williams around like 32 minutes or so, maybe 31 if Fournier's out. How do you see the backcourt and the wings breaking down? Because Simmons, look, he's not a high usage guy. He's not the greatest player, but he is very cheap. And we know that he comes in for Fournier at the end of the first and at the end of the third and plays pretty deep into each half. So Simmons definitely would stand to benefit if we don't have any Fournier.
Yeah, so if Fournier's in, I think Fournier plays around 32 minutes. You get around 20 from Simmons. Terrence Ross gets his, 30. Wes Iwundu starts at the 3 and plays a stint to start the first quarter, a stint to start the third quarter, ends up around 14 minutes. So out of that grouping, you end up with interest in Fournier and Ross. If Fournier misses, I think Ross stays in that like 30-minute range, maybe gets up to like 32, 33. But I think Simmons also jumps up to around 30, 32 minutes, and that you see Wes Iwundu pick up a bit more playing time as well, more than his one stint per half. So you would end up with interest in Simmons and Ross both playing probably around 30 minutes.
Yep, that's where I have him as well. Simmons to me just a little more enticing because he's cheaper, and that's really all it comes down to. $1,000 cheaper than Ross on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, you have Simmons small forward eligible at 4K, and then Ross shooting guard eligible at 4,800. So a little bit different there as well. Let's keep it going here. San Antonio and Miami. Here's a real barn burner. 215 total. Miami by 2 points at home. We're expecting both Hassan Whiteside to play and Goran Dragic to play. Dwayne Wade, however, is earlier I saw that Dragic was probable. Now I'm seeing questionable again. Now I'm still seeing questionable. So I guess he still is a legitimate question mark. But Dwayne Wade is also out for this game for personal reasons, Adam. So, on the surface, not really a fantasy friendly environment, but Wade's averaging 25 plus minutes per game. He does have a role in this rotation. And then you have a guy like Dragic who might sit. I thought he was going to play, but break this backcourt down. Let's talk about it because things could get a little interesting.
Yeah, so if Dragic plays, I don't think that Wade being out means a whole lot for fantasy purposes because you've had Wayne Ellington basically having no role in this rotation, just playing a handful of minutes here and there. I think that he would jump into enough minutes where Tyler Johnson gets a minutes boost, but 26 or 27 minutes of Tyler Johnson where he has Goran Dragic on the floor for some of them and he's sharing the ball with plenty of other guys isn't really all that appealing to me, especially at like a $4,500 price tag. So if Dragic is in, it kind of I still don't really have a ton that I like here from Miami. If Dragic is out, though, then I think you see around 32 minutes from Tyler Johnson, since there's just a ton of backcourt minutes to fill. I think you see a boost for Josh Richardson. I think you see a boost for Justice Winslow, both in terms of usage and in terms of facilitating and assist opportunities. Hassan Whiteside, I think, actually, if Dragic is out, loses a little bit of usage. That's been the case in the past. But Richardson, Winslow, Johnson all become really good plays if Dragic sits.
Agreed. Another thing too, San Antonio's backcourt defense this year has been very average, just average, across the board. Whether you're talking about efficiency allowed, field goal percentage, points, they've been average. You lose Danny Green and Dejounte Murray, and it's not going to do you many favors. So, yeah, this could get interesting. We'll stay tuned for the Goran Dragic news because that could make a difference, at least from a value standpoint. Adam, did you ever think there would come a day where Rodney McGruder was $6,300 on DraftKings?
I did not.
Neither did I, but he is, and I don't really have much intention of paying for him there. On the San Antonio side, I mean, this is a game really for the most part that, let's say Dragic plays, I'd really just be looking at from a tournament standpoint. I can't really fall in love with anyone from this game, even though Aldridge has seen his price come down. I don't think he's a crazy play whatsoever because he's generally pretty consistent. But, DeMar DeRozan is on FanDuel, 9,200. I think it's fair. I think it's reasonable. But I don't see him being a guy that you need to jam in there in what's going to be a pretty slow-paced environment. Talk to me about where you're at on this Spurs squad.
Yeah, so I don't have an issue at all with DeMar DeRozan. If he ends up in my lineups, that's fine. If you like him, play him. It's not a spot that I feel strongly about. Like I think he's probably a little bit overpriced, but he does have a 29.7% usage rate alongside Aldridge without Rudy Gay on the floor. He still has a 28.4% assist rate in that situation as well. So it's a perfectly fine spot for him. I do like Aldridge more, though, at a cheaper price tag. Aldridge is only $7,900 on DraftKings, and I think it's actually a pretty decent matchup for him. Hassan Whiteside's much better as a defender around the rim than he is when guys pull him away from the basket. And that'll be the case with Aldridge, who obviously can knock down shots away from the basket. So I expect that Aldridge will get some pretty good looks tonight at only 7,900, playing probably about 36 minutes. I like Aldridge the most on this team. And then Davis Bertans, I don't really like him, but he's 3,200. He should play, around 26 minutes. If he gets 18 points at 3,200 and you're trying to jam in stars, then that probably is fine.
Yeah. People tell me I look like Davis Bertans, which you haven't seen me in person. If you saw me in person, you'd say
we've hung out in Chicago.
What's that?
We've hung out before.
Yeah, but you were on heroin. No, that's not true at all. Not one bit. It was crack cocaine. So I don't expect you to remember anything. I look nothing like Davis Bertans. Give me a break, man. Is there anything else from this game, though, that entices you?
No, I think that Derek White being back is going to kind of throw a wrench into the other rotation guys that have been providing some value. I think Patty Mills loses a few minutes. I think Bellinelli maybe doesn't lose minutes, but at the very least, it makes it harder for him to have any path to like a ceiling. I think that Cunningham probably plays in the mid 20s. It kind of just is a mess.
You know what I was thinking though? This could be quite possibly. This could be one of those games, and I'm not suggesting you play this guy, but I'm just looking at it from a matchup, a positional breakdown. This could be one of those games where my dude, Jakob Poeltl, actually gets some minutes,
Yeah.
like decent run. I mean, he's a 7-footer. He's got a long way to go. By the way, Evan Fournier is active. Augustine Fournier, Owandu, Gordon, and Vooch is the starting lineup. Fournier is active. But Jakob Poeltl, like, this does seem like a spot where he could get relatively decent minutes, Adam. I'm not saying to play him. However, I am saying that I'm not just throwing Davis Bertans into the 27-minute role because I think he's locked into that. With Popovich as the coach, obviously no Pau Gasol, but having a 7-footer behind him does worry me a little bit because it's not like Bertans, even though he's been on the Spurs and Pop has, I guess, a little bit of faith in him. It's not like Bertans has been, particularly effective this year either.
No, I mean, I have Bertans playing 26 minutes. I have Poeltl playing 18.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
I'm expecting Bertans to start for Gay.
Okay. Well then, yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
But I do like your point on Poeltl just because he's 3,100. Bertans is 3,200. I think that if Poeltl plays 18 and Bertans plays 26, they project very, very, very similarly. I would assume that Bertans is higher owned, and Poeltl's the one where if he, for some reason, like let's say he plays more time at the 5 to match up with Whiteside and Aldridge slides to the 4, Poeltl is the better per minute producer between him and Bertans.
For sure. Yeah. That's all. And he's dirt cheap. I mean, it would take a lot for everything to work out, but if Whiteside stays on the floor and plays like 32 minutes, you're going to have a tough time with running Aldridge at the 5 all game. I think that could be difficult. Anyway, let's move on and talk about the New York Knicks and the Atlanta Hawks. You have a Hawks team playing their second of a back-to-back. They're 1.5-point dogs at home. Just two dreadful basketball teams, but you have a 225 total, Adam. You have a Hawks team that leads the league in pace. And then, of course, this should come as a surprise to nobody. You have two teams that have struggled defensively this year. Now, the Knicks haven't been awful, but they're also not particularly impressive either. And it's Cantor. When he's on the court, he's going to haul in a lot of boards. He's going to score points. We saw that monster game off the bench where Mitchell Robinson basically played no minutes. Noah Vonleh, when he stays out of foul trouble, actually isn't the worst defender. But I still don't think we have a good idea of what this defense is going to look like going forward. I would just I would lean on the side of they're not that great. Anyway, let's start with the Atlanta side. Torian Prince has been removed from the no injury designation. He's available to play. When I talk about minutes for certain guys, I do think it's important to mention that with a guy like Torian Prince, he's been in the foul trouble this year, and they've been in a lot of blowouts. But in close games where he's not in foul trouble, he's playing around 35 minutes. And he also has a career high usage rate of almost 27%, and he's averaging almost 9 3-point attempts per 36. So you have Kevin Huerter out with personal reasons. My guess is that if this game does stay close and it has a 1.5-point spread, that Prince comes back, assuming he's not hampered by the ankle, and plays like 35 minutes. And then Bembry probably plays around like 26 himself. Where do you stand on this Hawks team, starting with the wings?
I like Prince, and it scares me because he's someone that has let me down a ton in the past.
Me too.
But
it's hard to ignore him here.
Right. And the thing is, even if I project him for like 32 minutes, just because I was actually kind of trying to get him projected as low as I could, just because I have no confidence in him. But even if I project him for 32 minutes, he's jumping out of my projections as one of the top plays. It's still a 26.5% usage rate, like you mentioned, a 15.5% expected assist percentage this year. He also rebounds a bit. So I think that's all really appealing at a sub 6K price tag on DraftKings in the spot against the Knicks. So I'm going to end up with a good amount of Prince. It terrifies me, but I don't think there's any question that the ceiling's there at the very least.
I think so too. It scares me. Scares me quite a bit. But Prince is below 6K on DraftKings now, which means I'm willing to consider him again. Talk to me. The rest of the Atlanta side. You got Trey Young coming off a 6-turnover game where he had an 18-10 double-double. He was okay. Given the slate, he wasn't terrible. He didn't kill you. Kent Bazemore had a nice second half, but the first half, plagued with foul trouble, was brutal as well. It's kind of what you get from this team. They are very, very hit or miss from a fantasy standpoint. It turns out that, yesterday, Alex Len gets off to a hot start and then completely disappears as well, while Dwayne Dedmon only plays 19 minutes. The front court rotation is a bit of a mess, especially with John Collins out. Amari Spellman played 16 minutes. The minutes are all over the place here, Adam. Anything else other than Prince and maybe like DeAndre Bembry?
Yeah, I mean, Prince is clearly my favorite play from this team.
Me too.
Yeah, and then you have, Trey Young, Bazemore, I think are perfectly reasonable options. Like I think they're priced correctly, but they're not bad plays. You have upside in Len and Dedmon for their prices, but they come with a ton of risk. So Prince is the only guy that I plan on prioritizing from this team.
Me as well. Outside of that, it's tough. On the Knicks side, pricing is a little bit different across sites, Adam, because Hardaway's 7,800 on DraftKings and say Donovan Mitchell is 7,400. On FanDuel, Donovan Mitchell's 8,500 and Tim Hardaway's 7,500, significantly discounted from guys like Mitchell and Holiday and Oladipo and such. Whereas it's not exactly the case on DraftKings, where he's very closely priced and actually more expensive than someone like Mitchell. What do you make of this backcourt start with Hardaway, because then we're going to have to spend a second on this disgustingly muddled backcourt situation. I'm glad Hardaway is back for that reason alone.
Yeah, me too, because that last game was just a nightmare to even look at and try and break down. So Hardaway, I think, is the only guy that I actually have projected from the Knicks for more than 30 minutes tonight, because we've just been seeing them run such weird rotations in general. You have Kevin Knox back in there to mess things up as well. So I have Hardaway projected for about 34 minutes. Should get, usage rate into the 30s. He's been, when he plays with the starting unit, there's just no one out there that's the high usage guy with the exception of him. So he should get plenty of shots. He also is getting more potential assists with this group. So I like Hardaway. It just kind of comes down to the site as well. Like you said, should be easier to get to him on FanDuel. But I do think that he's the highest upside play from the Knicks. Obviously he should be able to do pretty much everything on the offensive end, and it's a revenge game too, if that's something that you care about.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how Tim Hardaway. Let me see. Look it up right now. What his history is against the Hawks. 31 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. I'm kidding. I really don't care about the revenge narrative, but I would have probably mentioned it if you didn't. So that's cool. But no, I think that FanDuel price though is really appealing. And look, there are a lot of players this year, right, that are kind of bursting onto the scene, or last year started to make a name for themselves, and now they're just very heavy usage has made them more relevant. I'll give you a list of names, Adam. Zach Lavine, Tim Hardaway, Donovan Mitchell, all at shooting guard. All of them very similar players in that they chuck the ball. They'll take plenty of threes. 2 of them play on bad teams, but all 3 of them play on teams where there's nobody else outside of maybe Cantor for Hardaway. No one else that's really going to soak up heavy usage. So when I'm looking at players like this, oftentimes I'm going to take the guy that offers the most points per dollar. And up until now, I think we can both agree that Zach Lavine was that guy, right? 74, 7,600. You just keep playing him until his price tag comes up. But now his price tag has come up, and he's more expensive by $700 than Hardaway. He's $1,100 more expensive than Mitchell on DraftKings. That forces you to look elsewhere, and I think Hardaway is one of those guys.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In tournaments, you're just trying to get as much ceiling into your lineup as you can.
Correct.
Is Zach Lavine a great play? Sure. Is he Does he have a higher floor than Tim Hardaway? Yeah,
Yep.
probably. He plays more minutes. And he's got an even higher usage rate. But is Zach Lavine's raw point ceiling higher than Tim Hardaway's? I think they're very, very, very close.
So do I. And we've seen it. We've seen big games from both of them, and both of them need a lot of points in order to do so. Real scoring. Um, well, if Hardaway was out, we'd have had to spend like 20 minutes breaking down this Knicks backcourt, which would really make me miserable. So I'm glad that's not the case. But now that he returns, and now that you have Kevin Knox back in the rotation, only played 5 minutes last game, but he's going to see more today. So, I mean, it's got to affect some of these guys outside of Hardaway. Are you interested in an Enes Kanter at 7,100 on DraftKings and over on FanDuel weighing in at 7,300? Does he do anything for you at this price?
Not really. I was playing him when he got down into the low sixes just because
Mhm.
he didn't need that much more playing time to come through. Now it's kind of like you need him to really get the upper end of his minutes range to get there. And he's a center. It's a deep enough position that I don't really see going there. The only other guy, like Mitchell Robinson, I guess is okay if you're playing a bunch of lineups. He's not
Yeah,
someone.
strictly in tournaments because
Right, right.
his minutes are tied to Cantor's production in large part.
Everyone on this team is strictly in tournaments. There's the rotation is just too much
Yeah.
of a mess. And Noah Vonleh, like I think he loses a few minutes with Kevin Knox back, but he's just been so good when he's not in foul trouble that I think at 5,200 on DraftKings, that's still a very reasonable price. I have him projected for 26 minutes and still, as a good play at around 30 fantasy points.
All right, let's move on then. Unless there's anything else from this one you want to touch on that we've yet to.
Oh, Mudiay in large field tournaments at 3,500. I think it's the kind of spot where you can take advantage of how in flux the rotation is. When Mudiay originally came back, David Fizdale talked about him eventually taking over as the starting point guard. Frank Ntilikina has done nothing really to keep that job, at least offensively, since he was given it. He only played 16 minutes last game. We saw Mudiay play a bunch. So I think that while nobody is looking at Mudiay, he's the kind of guy at 3,500 on DraftKings or as a punt on FanDuel that you can drop if you need to. He's the kind of guy that having some exposure to him in large field tournaments can potentially like win you one.
Yeah, maybe. Look, Ntilikina shot himself off the floor. Like it was such a terrible performance. Uh, and he should like if Ntilikina came out of the gate at him, and I had him in some lineups that I ended up cashing with his 4.5. And I never play Ntilikina, but I'm like, Hardaway's out. Might not make a huge impact on a minute standpoint, but the usage should be there because they don't have a lot of high usage guys. I'll get some Ntilikina in there. If he came out of the gate, Adam, and was even remotely decent, he's probably seeing some minutes in overtime over Mudiay and some minutes in the fourth quarter. I mean, he played like 3 or 4 minutes in the second half. It was just one of the worst performances of the year.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So yeah, I mean, the point is just like you shouldn't have any confidence in Mudiay, but if he runs in the 24, 25 minutes, he should not have trouble beating a $3,500 price tag.
All right, let's keep this one moving. We got some games to get to here. Chat's moving pretty fast, but I'm trying to keep track of your questions. There's one really, really interesting username in there as well. I'll let you guess what that is. Philly and Indiana. Should be a close game. These teams, this is a fun matchup when these teams play each other. You got a few quality, you got Depot, you got Simmons, you got Embiid, of course, who is second in scoring this season. Pacers 3-point favorites, 216 total. Something I found interesting. I'm not a big DVP guy, defense versus position, unless I think it's relevant and I can break down the matchups and where the points are coming from, Adam. I found it pretty fascinating that this season, the Sixers are allowing the most points, the highest efficiency, the second most rebounds, and second most blocks to centers, with the second or the league most field goal attempts and second most free throws to the position. That's pretty incredible given, Embiid at the 5. I think he's been taking a lot of risks defensively, and he will block shots. He can still make some big critical plays, but just in terms of what production has been allowed to opposing centers, they have given up a lot of production to them. I found that quite interesting this year.
Yeah, that is interesting. And Miles Turner's cheap. I mean,
Now you see where I'm going, and I hate Miles Turner.
yeah,
I
I
hate
mean,
playing this guy.
it's a terrifying spot, but $5,000 for a guy with Turner's ceiling, I think, is at least worth considering.
Yeah, a couple okay. Could he get into some foul trouble and then it all goes to shit? Yeah, of course he could. Anyone could against Embiid. That's just factual. But predicting blocks, or I'm sorry, I was looking up how many times the Sixers have been blocked this year against pretty much league average. Predicting foul trouble is about as easy as predicting blowouts, Adam. It's not as easy as expected, you know?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I just don't really do. Like,
Unless you're Jaren Jackson.
yeah, I mean, Jaren Jackson, it's the assumption is that he's gonna have 6 fouls by the end of the first half.
Yeah, exactly. Um, even though I kinda like him, we'll get to him
So
in
do
the
I.
next game. What's that?
So do I.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and break down the Philly side of the ball first? I should point out too that we are waiting on some news, and we are waiting on news of Robert Covington. And the reason this is important is because Mike Muscala has a broken face, so he's out, and Wilson Chandler's limited to 15 minutes. So unless you plan on playing Ben Simmons off the ball at the 3, which is just a dumb decision and makes no sense and never works out, then this rotation thins out quite a bit at the 3 and 4, Adam, which would mean nothing but the absolutely horrendously playing Dario Saric is basically thrust into a 35-minute role.
Yeah, which would be good for guys like Thad Young. I mean, it's good for Thad Young anyway. It's Sarge has just looked really slow on the defensive end this year,
Horrible.
and
You know what
Young.
someone mentioned to me? One of my neighbors actually said the guy plays like every month of the year. He's not just playing NBA. He wonders if his legs are just dead because he's never getting any time off in the off season.
Makes
Good
sense.
question.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So I mean, I think that it's a good spot for Thad Young. It's never someone that I'm super excited about just because it's Thad Young, but I think you get 30 to 32 minutes here in a spot that has been very productive. Going against Saric. Oladipo is fine. Like he obviously has an upside, but at 8,700, I'd rather play guys like Lavine or Drew Holiday, or take the savings with a similar ceiling on guys like Mitchell and Tim Hardaway. So Turner, I think, is my favorite play from the Indiana side, but there's nothing that I really love here.
Yeah, that's tough for me. For me, my favorite would be Miles Turner, as you just said. Is he a must? No, but he's viable. And again, you look on DraftKings, Wendell Carter Jr. is still underpriced. You might look at his game and be like, oh, he only played 22 minutes. Well, yeah, that's because he fouled out in 22 minutes and still had 35 fantasy points. Like this dude's been a monster. So I'd probably look to see if I could just get up a little higher to Wendell Carter. But Turner's the one guy I agree that I would be most interested from this side of the ball if going anywhere. What about Philly's side? We talked a little bit about Saric, and I think we both agree that he would get the minutes, which I think it'd be if Saric didn't play like 34, 35 minutes in a close game, I'd be really surprised if Covington was out because Muscala's already out and Chandler's limited.
Yeah, I mean, I have Saric projected for 32 or 33 minutes, even with Covington in, because
Okay.
of Muscala being out and Chandler being limited. They're just
Right.
they're so thin on the wings. So, yeah, and I think like Josh and I talked about it this morning. Saric has looked awful. There's no disputing that.
Terrible.
But his price tag's also down to 4,800, and he's shooting so much worse this year than he has before. Is it possible that he's playing through an injury or his legs are dead, like you mentioned? Yeah, sure, but at this price, I still like to roster guys that are shooting, 7 to 8 points below where we expect them to be in terms of true shooting and 3-point percentage. I just think that it gives you upside when his price gets this cheap. So I'll end up playing Saric. It probably will go as poorly as it has all season long, but as long as he's 4,800 and I can project him to play into the 30s, I'm going to keep doing it.
Adam, do you watch basketball games?
Yes.
Yeah. Manningdale City, I think he's a little confused. He said, ship my money, DFS. You don't watch NBA games, admittedly, and you don't watch or answer questions in chat. Well, that part's true. But what you've admitted is not that you don't watch games, it's that you don't care about statistical or where they stand, what team's record. You don't actually care about specific team.
I care about
you are a Wizards fan, but you watch a lot of basketball.
Yeah,
Come on now.
Yeah.
Come on.
I just don't care. I don't know like what the standings look like right now, and I don't care about potential trades.
Who is dead last in the Eastern Conference?
The Wizards.
Are they?
I have no idea.
See.
It's just, I mean, they're 2-7.
Cavaliers. The Cavaliers are 1-9. Who's dead last in the West?
I have no idea.
Phoenix Suns. What a dog shit team that is. 2-8. Yeah, this game to me though, Philly Indy is one that I think for the most part I'm steering clear of. Embiid has been really as reliable as anyone this year. He's had a couple down games, but aside from that, Adam, the guy is just producing monster numbers. It's also interesting. I watch a lot of Sixers basketball. It's also interesting that Ben Simmons has really seemed a lot more passive this year. Like he's only really getting even remotely aggressive when other teams are doubling or tripling Embiid, which is kind of funny because Embiid during a post-game conference was like, yeah, that game against Atlanta was tough. They brought doubles and triples, but I found out ways to work around that, and it's a learning experience. He only wants to get better. And guys like him that all they want to do is dominate each and every game always scare me when I'm fading them. But it's a tough price point, man. He's getting up there now. He's not 10-3 or 9-7 like he was a week ago, which is crazy in its own right. Now Embiid is up there in terms of price point. He's the second highest priced guy on DraftKings behind only Anthony Davis. And he is the second on FanDuel as well because Russell Westbrook's out.
Yeah, it's really tough for me to get to Embiid. It's not that I dislike the spot. It's not that I dislike him, but I just can't get there, especially at a center position where you can get, similar upside from guys like Drummond or Karl-Anthony Towns in a great spot that we'll get to. It's just always such a deep position in the mid-range that paying all the way up at center is normally something I struggle with, and paying over 11K for Embiid, especially because people do it. I mean, the other day I think he was the most expensive player on the slate at like 11.5 or 11.6 or something. And he was still like twice as owned as Ben Simmons was for $2,000 less on like a 6-game slate. So it would be one thing if you told me that, nobody's going to play Embiid and I can be by myself with him, but I still expect him to get enough ownership where it's just not worth it to me to pay all the way up.
All right, let's keep it going then. I think we're good on this game for now, but we'll stay tuned for Covington news because that can make an impact. Memphis and Denver, Adam. Grizzlies at home against a quality Nuggets team. Very quality Nuggets team that looks really good. I wouldn't be surprised that within a year from now, the Nuggets are a top 2 or 3 team in the West.
Yeah, they're really good, and they have a ton of young talent.
They are. They're really good. Give them a couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised to see them surpass Houston. Chris Paul is not getting younger. Still a very good player, but not getting any younger. And they just have a wealth of talent. And Will Barton, is still out. Like, just look at the depth on this roster. It's really quite incredible. Jokic, Millsap's a nice veteran presence. Even guys like Plumlee and Lyles are quality depth. Hernan Gomez, again, not saying they're studs, but Will Barton and Murray and Harris. This team's got a lot, man, and they've been fun to watch. They're facing Memphis. They're favored by 3.5 points. You've got a 204 over under here, Adam. Not the biggest surprise though, because both of these teams are playing at a crawling pace. I mean, Denver's a 6th lowest pace in the league. Memphis is 2nd lowest, ahead of only the Pacers. This is not the most fantasy-friendly matchup, but we'll start with Memphis, and I'll ask you about Jaren Jackson, who this season is averaging 6.3 personal fouls per 36. So yes, he's averaging more than a foul out per 36. Pretty sweet, right? But he's also producing 105 fantasy points per minute, which is good. He has 30 plus fantasy points in every game where he's managed to get 28 or more minutes, 3 of them. And he played 32 minutes last game against the Wizards because he wasn't in foul trouble. And he has a 6.1% block rate, which if you know anything about block rates, it's not JaVale McGee level, but it's actually really good. So at 5,900 across sites, Jaren Jackson at least interests me because I think JB Bickerstaff wants to give him the minutes. You just can't give a guy minutes when he's already fouled out of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think his price tag, I mean, he's 4,900 on DraftKings. I think that price tag reflects the foul trouble, and that's it. Because, like you said, he's greater than a point per minute guy when he's on the floor. It's not a great matchup here, but even if you account for that, I think it's too cheap of a price tag if Jackson's able to stay on the floor. So he's the kind of guy that, I'll limit my exposure so that I'm not, way, way, way ahead of the field, because there is so much risk in him since the foul rate's just absolutely ridiculous. But I'd like to be overweight on him because the price tag's just too cheap for his upside. The minutes should be there, like you said, as long as he doesn't foul. So yeah, I like Jackson, easily my favorite player in this game.
Jeff Mcdonald, the Spurs beat reporter, by the way. Thanks for this one, Rinpack. He put it in chat over in Slack chat. If you're not a member of Slack chat, you should join. And if you're already a subscriber to Osmo and you're not in Slack, get in Slack. He asked if Pirtle was going to start or how many minutes, and he said, "I'm not expecting Pirtle to start, but with Gasol out, I'd expect him to log a healthy number of minutes off the bench." I think that's pretty much what we said. So that lines up. Anything else from Memphis or Denver or anything here?
I mean, Jamal Murray's been playing like 38 minutes a night, so that's appealing, but he's also pretty expensive. It's a tough matchup. Gary Harris's price at 6K, I think, is reasonable, and Kyle Anderson at 4,100 is reasonable, even though he sucks. So there's some secondary guys, but Jackson's the only one who, at his price, really stands out to me as having a ton of upside as long as he can stay on the floor.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Just the price point and the prospect of playing 30 plus minutes if he's not fouling out is kind of nice. Let's keep it going then. Trying to get this pace moving, but also get it to all of the games that we find important. That last one, not so much. Even though I didn't think Murray was going to drop 497 points against the Celtics either. But what are you going to do? Hit us with a thumbs up, subscribe, and like. We got what, 800? We got about 900 people watching. A 105-5 ratio there. Let's bump that ratio, boys and girls. Come on now. Come on. Adam, Chicago, New Orleans. Right now, the Pels are 10.5-point favorites. I think it opened at 9.5, 228.5 total. Bad Chicago team. We're going to start with the Bulls here because I find this Bulls team interesting. And I find Wendell Carter Jr. really, really interesting with how good he's played. And I'll put it quite simply. And the floor is yours. Until Carter Jr.'s price point matches his production, he is going to remain a strong play in my eyes, unless it's like an impossible matchup. And even in that case, I don't know if I'd be sold on a fade at 6 or 6,200, because if he's not in foul trouble, he's getting like 35 minutes a game. And his usage is up to 24% over the last 6 games where he has 30 or more fantasy points in all of them. Rebounding well, defensive stats. He's just been incredibly impressive on a team that really could care less about getting Jabari Parker the ball. Outside of Zach Lavine, Wendell Carter's been the number 2.
Yeah, he's been really, really impressive, and now it's a pace-up spot against a New Orleans team that's just been awful defensively this season. So I think that, especially on DraftKings at 6,200, like you said, Wendell Carter remains a really good play here. I think that the price tag's just too cheap for his upside. So I like him. I like Zach Lavine again. I mean, in competitive games, Lavine's playing, 38, 39 minutes a night. This defense has not been good. Granted, Drew Holiday is a quality defender, but the pieces around him have just been so bad defensively that it hasn't mattered. So I like Lavine. I still think Parker's underpriced for his upside, but he's someone that I'll gladly just be underweight on as long as he keeps being 20 to 30% owned in tournaments, because he does suffer. His usage suffers alongside Zach Lavine. He's not an efficient player. He doesn't do a whole lot other than score. So it's just really easy for him to have disappointing games. And Cameron Payne did close the last game for Chicago and then played both overtimes. I thought that was really important to see because the game before that was the first time that we had seen Chicago run a lineup in a competitive game that did not have Cameron Payne or Ryan Arcidiacono on the floor. They had Zach Lavine at the 1. And if that was going to be the new closing lineup, then it takes a lot of the value or potential value away from Cameron Payne. But it was good to see him back on the floor. He played 30 minutes in regulation, 40 minutes total. He's the same price as George Hill, who's going to be really, really popular, I believe. I really like Payne as a tournament pivot. The minutes obviously are volatile, but I don't think that he's any worse of a fantasy player than George Hill is, and he should be lower owned.
Very interesting. All right. Um, where do you have Carter Jr. ranked in among centers on DraftKings specifically?
Let me pull it up. I think he's in my top 5 for sure.
I think he's in my top 4.
I have Davis number 1, but like as I already said. Sorry, I have Drummond in terms of value. I have Drummond, Davis. Actually, I don't have Carter that high. I have Drummond, Davis, McGee, Towns, Cauley-Stein, Carter.
Okay, fair enough. So you have Willie Cauley-Stein over Carter. That's where we're different. I have him over Cauley-Stein, even though I think Cauley-Stein's an interesting play. Some housekeeping here. Luka Doncic for Dallas listed as probable. Kawhi Leonard also probable. Reggie Bullock will start. I know that's a big one. And the Thunder are starting Schroeder, Ferguson, George, Grant, and Adams. So there you have it. That's the news. We'll give you more as we move forward. This game, though, Adam, on the other side is interesting because we don't expect Payton to play. I think he's questionable, but you had mentioned, or Josh had mentioned earlier today, that Alvin Gentry mentioned that he's questionable, but he's probably not going to play. So we'll assume he's not. You still have Holiday, you still have Nico, you still have Randall, and Davis. It's you have to keep projecting him, towards the top or at the top. Like you have to keep doing that. I totally understand it, but he's been a tough guy to pull the trigger on lately, especially with how well some of these mid-range guys have been producing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my only issue with him is that I think there's still a ton of mid-range upside today. I have Davis easily projected as the highest scorer on the slate, but Cruncher's still just not putting him in a ton of my lineups. And I think it's just because of how much upside there is at cheaper price tags. So if you can get to Davis, by all means, go for it. I think that there is some concern just because we know he's playing through that elbow injury. He doesn't have a reputation of being the toughest guy in the league by any stretch. And he has not been particularly good while playing through it. So there's obviously concern there, but it is an excellent matchup. And I wouldn't hesitate to roster him if I can get him into my lineups. But I do like going to some of these cheaper guys because it is such a good matchup against the Bulls. Just, a really, really bad defensive team. Assuming Elfrid Payton sits out, you should see another, 38 to 40 minutes out of Jrue Holiday. He gets a boost in assist rate without Payton on the floor. He also will get enough usage to, be a productive scorer. And then Julius Randle and Nikola Mirotic, 2 games in a row now, we've seen the Anthony Davis at the 5, Julius Randle, Nikola Mirotic lineup, which means that we can project Randle for a couple of more minutes. It's easier for him to approach 30. I have him in at 28 minutes. I have Nico at 32. I have Davis at 38. But the fact that they're using that lineup now just helps to solidify the minutes for Julius Randle, who I think is a really good play at 6,500 and maybe goes a little bit overlooked just because the minutes aren't going to project as highly as some other guys.
Yeah, I could see it.
Like Julius Randle against Felicio seems like a really, really good matchup.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, for sure. And Randle, I mean, if there's one thing about Randle too, the guy is not seeing monster minutes. It's hard. There's a lot of bodies in that front court and a lot of good bodies that you have to play. But his usage rate is 28%. So we know that when he's out there, he's putting in work, and that's kind of what matters most here.
Yeah.
I agree with you on Randle for sure.
Yeah, and it's not just usage either. Like he rebounds and he picks up assists. So
Sure.
He's someone that should benefit from how bad Chicago's defense is too, not only in his own scoring, but in what should be a high conversion rate on his potential assists.
Hey, Julius Randle's got a triple-double or 2 in under his belt.
Yeah,
that is true.
That can't defend in transition.
Yep. Hassan Whiteside's active as expected. Dallas and Utah. We've got Utah right now as a 9.5-point favorite at home against the Dallas team playing their second of a back-to-back, this one on the road. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some interest in Donovan Mitchell here. 7,400 on DraftKings, specifically on DraftKings, not on FanDuel. I mean, it kind of just comes down to, for me, really the same thing as Lavine when Lavine was too cheap. That's really all it is. I think, Mitchell is still sporting a 30% usage rate. He's still chucking up 20 shots per game. He's still facing a Dallas defense that doesn't concern me. And he's still playing for a team that there's no one else that's going to run the risk of getting super hot and phasing him out. So Mitchell at 7,400 is a guy that I'm very, very much considering tonight.
Yeah, I like him. I still don't have him projected to be as good of a play as some of the guys that are a little more expensive, like Holiday and Lavine, or even Hardaway. But I do think that the price is a little bit too cheap. So he's someone that I would want to have exposure to in tournaments.
Are you getting exposure to anyone else in this game?
Not a ton. I think it's an okay spot for all of the Utah starters, but it's just not that appealing of a game from a fantasy standpoint. I do think that as a tournament play, $5,500 Dennis Smith Jr. on DraftKings is actually pretty interesting because Utah has not been as good defensively as expected this season, but Rudy Gobert in particular is allowing about a 66% field goal rate at the rim compared to about 60% last year. And you probably remember, but it was either last year or the year before. Driving point guards against Utah was actually a really profitable spot because whenever Gobert played alongside Favors, because there was just kind of issues with if Gobert was pulled away from the basket a little bit, Favors would be late getting there. With DeAndre Jordan, he's not someone that you expect to be pulling Gobert away, but the fact that driving players have had success here, Smith at 5,500 I think is pretty interesting, and JJ Barea at 3,800. Jalen Brunson is completely out of the rotation now. Barea picked up some extra minutes. For most of the season, he's just been the backup to Dennis Smith. But in the game against Washington yesterday, Barea did pick up some extra minutes at the 2. And at 3,800, if you're going to start getting 22 minutes out of JJ Barea, I think that there's value there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me circle back quickly. DeAndre Bembry starting over Torian Smith, Adam, for Atlanta.
All right. So is he going to play?
So Torian Smith is not on a minutes limit.
But he's not starting. Torian Prince?
Torian Prince is not on a minute limit, but he will not start. Bembry will start.
Okay.
I think you get 30 minutes plus from Bembry here. You already have Kevin Huerter out. I already assumed that Bembry would get some run. What he'll do with it is yet to be seen. But I think Bembry gets you 30, 32 minutes in this spot. He's starting. Wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't see this being an instance where he plays like 6 first quarter minutes and then doesn't come back out and then starts the second half, plays 6 minutes and doesn't come back out. He's already a big enough part of the rotation that I expect to get some run. Any thoughts on this? We got to hurry up, but we got 2 games to go. What are your thoughts on the Prince situation?
It just scares me because we've seen coaches so often be like, yeah, he's going to play. He's not going to start. And then the guy just doesn't play.
Oh, this has me off of Prince. I should have said that. This has me off of Prince. I can't do it.
Yeah, Bembry, I'm with you. I gave him a few more minutes. I think he's a reasonable play.
All right. Shane Mullen says Torian Smith will get 0 DraftKings points. I hope, because he's not in my player pool.
Well,
okay.
You called Torian Prince twice.
What?
That's what you called Torian Prince.
Did I? Yeah. I called him Torian Smith? Oh, well, look at that. Mud on my face. All right. At least he spelled Torian wrong. I got that, Shane. All right. Torian Smith. Anyway, Toronto and Sacramento. What do we got here, man? What do we got? Kawhi's probable. Toronto's 8.5 point favorites, 232.5 total. And yeah, they have been really, really good this year. But Sacramento hasn't exactly been a whipping boy either. They've been a decent enough team to keep games competitive. Not sure that's the case going forward, but they're 6-4. They're putting up points. This young core is starting to get it together a bit.
Yeah, and I love the price tag on De'Aaron Fox on DraftKings at 6,300. I mean, he's locked into 34 plus minutes a night, 24.5% usage, a 34% expected assist percentage. I think that it's it's obviously a really good Toronto team. It's a good Toronto defense, but I just think the price tag on him is a bit too cheap. Bogdan Bogdanovic is questionable. He could potentially muddy things a little bit just because he is a capable ball handler and pretty decent offensive player, but I'm not overly concerned about that. I still think the price tag is more than fair on Fox. And then Willie Cauley-Stein. I mean, if this game stays competitive, I expect 33 or 34 minutes out of him. He's still less than $7,000 on DraftKings. He's well over a point per minute guy. So as long as he's that cheap, I'm going to keep going there, especially when the combination of Serge Ibaka and Jonas Valanciunas isn't that imposing.
Yeah. I think Cauley Stein's really enticing too because he's cheap and he's giving you good numbers. I'm a big De'Aaron Fox fan, but I don't see myself going here, even though I think he's too cheap. Like I think if you were to play Fox, I wouldn't blame you for it, just because on DraftKings you're getting him at 6,300. That is too cheap for De'Aaron Fox. I mean, he's 8K on FanDuel, so I do think the pricing there certainly makes a difference. I do want to say one thing, Adam. Before I do, is there anything else in this Toronto game now that Kawhi's probable that you're interested in?
I think Kawhi himself is fine, but beyond that, Jonas Valanciunas on DraftKings at $5,000. If I project him for 22 minutes, I still get him as a 6x guy. And the matchup with Willie Cauley-Stein, he could get a couple of extra minutes. So I think Valanciunas is a pretty interesting play at 5K.
All right. I just wanted to say one more thing about the Torian Smith Prince situation. I am I look at this now and I feel like if he's really not limited, um, and Lloyd Pierce gives him full run off the bench and just wants to inject something into this team by mixing things up. If Prince plays 30 minutes off the bench and is staggered away from Trey Young and such, he could really have a good game. But it's tournament only. It's very risky. And the dude was out with an injury yesterday, so no minutes limit. It's really hard to trust that. So it is appealing, but it's also terrifying. I wouldn't do much more than sprinkle him into a couple lineups and tournaments and hope that you can hit gold.
Yeah.
Minnesota.
I'll have him in at least, a couple of. I'm playing like 15 lineups tonight on DraftKings. I'll have him in a couple, but he was going to be a core guy for me.
All right. Yeah, he was going to be a core guy for me and a guy that I would have been okay with in cash as well. But now you kind of can't do that. It's too much of a risk. I think Bembry gets the run, but it's difficult to say what he does with that. Stick around after the show, live before lock with Chris and Eddie. Going to take you up till 7 p.m. Eastern time for this 10-gamer. Minnesota, LA Lakers. Lakers by 6 points. Dude, Minnesota's in disarray with Jimmy Butler trying to get out of there. There's a video of him waving the rally flag waving the rally flag at the Oracle with the Golden State Warrior fans. He does not give a he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He wants out. And then on the other side, the Lakers are so ridiculously dysfunctional as well. Butler would be way too cheap in this spot if I trusted that he actually wanted to help them win games, Adam, but he doesn't. So we only have a couple minutes here. Let's go quick. Point guard Derrick Rose leads the team in usage this year, is a really cheap play here, and especially if Butler's out. Talk about him and Towns.
Yeah, I love Rose. I love Towns. Butler would be my third guy here. But yeah, Rose got the start at point guard over Tyus Jones last game. Played like 38, 39 minutes. Even if you project him for 34 or 35, he comes in as a top point per dollar option in a very fast-paced game against the Lakers. Towns is one of my favorite center plays as well. I think just sub $9,000 is just too cheap for this matchup for him. Obviously, whenever Butler plays, there is some concern with Towns' productivity, but the upside's clearly there, as we saw the last time he faced this team when he dropped 64 fantasy points and Butler went for 54 or 55.
For sure. Lakers, McGee's my only guy that I really have much interest in. Is there anyone else that I'm missing here?
McGee and LeBron, but I probably won't get much LeBron.
Yeah, it's not to say that you don't play LeBron. It's just I don't know if I want to pay for him. It's just been difficult, but obviously LeBron always has that ceiling. It's just when will it happen is the question. We don't have time to do positions, but in Slack, I'll give you the top positions. I think Adam will do the same: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. If you're in Slack, go ahead and check that out. I know a bunch of people asked for that throughout the day. All right. Appreciate everyone for tuning in today. Give us a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe. Hit that notification bell because we come on at different times depending on the slate length and how comprehensive it's going to be. Good luck today. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Deeper Dive. Stick around for Chris and Eddie.